You're standing at the gate with the same carry-on you've used on 20 flights. Same bag, same airline, same route. But today, the gate agent stops you. They pull out a metal measuring frame you've never seen them use before. Your bag doesn't fit. You're told you need to check it. Right now, and there's a fee. This isn't random. It's happening at gates across the country, and most travelers have no idea why. The bag that cleared security, that fit in the overhead bin last month, is suddenly a problem. Gate agents aren't explaining it. Airlines aren't announcing it. But the enforcement is real, it's spreading, and if you fly this year, it's going to affect you. Something changed in the last few months, and airlines didn't send out press releases about it. Starting in late 2024 and accelerating into early 2025, major carriers quietly tightened their carry-on enforcement procedures. Not the rules themselves. The published size limits are still the same numbers they've always been, but the way those rules are being applied at the gate has fundamentally shifted. Gate agents now have explicit instructions to measure bags more frequently, challenge anything that looks borderline, and prioritize enforcement over passenger flow. This isn't a temporary crackdown or a response to a specific incident. It's a deliberate, system-wide recalibration of how carry-on compliance is monitored. Travelers who flew regularly in 2023 and early 2024 are now getting stopped with bags they've used without issue for years. There were no emails, no updated policy pages, no warnings in the booking process. The enforcement just became stricter, and passengers are finding out at the worst possible moment, when boarding is about to close. Those metal sizer frames have always been at the gate. Most of the time, they just sat there, unused. That's changed. Gate agents are now actively pulling them out and requiring passengers to test their bags before boarding. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Even if your bag technically meets the dimensions, agents are targeting bags that appear overstuffed or bulging. The frame test isn't just about length, width, and height anymore. It's about whether the bag slides in smoothly. If your bag is packed tight and the fabric is stretched even slightly, agents are treating it as oversized, regardless of what the measurement tape says. This introduces a subjective element that didn't exist before. Two identical bags, same brand, same model, can be treated differently based on how full they are. One passenger gets waved through, another gets stopped. There's no consistency, no clear threshold, and travelers are realizing that meeting the size limit on paper doesn't guarantee anything anymore. Airlines are flying newer aircraft with redesigned cabin interiors. These planes often have smaller overhead bins to make room for updated ventilation systems, larger screens, or modified seat configurations. But here's the problem. The published carry-on size limits haven't changed to reflect this. You're still told your bag can be 22 by 14 by 9 inches, but the overhead compartment on the plane you're boarding can't actually accommodate that size comfortably. So what happens? Gate agents start pulling bags that technically comply with the airline's own rules because they know those bags won't fit in the bins on that specific aircraft. Passengers get blamed for bringing oversized luggage when the real issue is the plane itself. You followed the guidelines. You measured your bag. You did everything right. But the aircraft changed, the rules didn't, and now you're the one facing a forced check and a fee. Here's something most travelers don't realize until it's too late. There's a difference between voluntarily gate checking your bag and being forced to check it. If you check a bag at the ticket counter before security, you pay the standard checked bag fee, usually $30 to $35 on domestic flights. But if a gate agent stops you at boarding and requires you to check your carry-on, that's classified differently. Some airlines are now charging what they call a gate valet or non-compliance fee. That can run anywhere from $70 to over $95 depending on the carrier and route. It's the same bag going into the same cargo hold, but the timing of when you're forced to surrender it changes the price dramatically. Passengers who would have paid $30 at check-in are now paying triple that amount because they tried to carry on a bag the gate agent decided didn't qualify. The financial penalty for getting stopped at the gate has never been higher. It's not just carry-ons anymore. Gate agents are now scrutinizing personal items with the same intensity. Backpacks, tote bags, even large purses are being measured and challenged. The general guideline for personal items is usually around 18 by 14 by 8 inches, but enforcement of this rule is wildly inconsistent. At one airport, your backpack passes without a second glance. At another, The same bag gets flagged, and you're told it needs to go under the seat or be checked entirely. Some airlines count a laptop bag and a purse as two personal items. Others allow it. The lack of standardization creates confusion that travelers can't prepare for. You can't pack strategically when the rules shift depending on which gate agent you encounter or which airport you're flying through. Passengers report being stopped for personal items they've carried on dozens of flights without issue. There's no warning which day enforcement will be strict and which day it won't. It's unpredictable, and honestly, that unpredictability is deliberate. Gate agents aren't waiting until you reach the podium to assess your luggage anymore. They're watching the gate area while passengers are still seated, waiting for boarding to begin. They're scanning the crowd, identifying bags that look questionable, and making mental notes before groups are even called. Some travelers report being approached while still sitting in the waiting area and told their bag will need to be checked before they board. This pre-boarding observation means you're being evaluated before you have any chance to adjust, repack, or make your case. By the time your boarding group is called, decisions have already been made about your bag. There's something a bit unsettling about realizing you're being monitored before the process even starts. You're just sitting there, thinking everything is fine, while a gate agent across the room has already flagged your carry-on as non-compliant. It removes any element of chance or negotiation. The outcome is determined before you even stand up. If you're flying basic economy, you're being watched more closely. Airlines barely break even on these deeply discounted fares. And honestly, in many cases, they actually lose money when operational costs are factored in. Bag fee enforcement has become a revenue recovery tool to offset those losses. Gate agents receive more pressure to enforce carry-on restrictions on basic economy passengers because every checked bag fee directly improves the flight's profitability. Travelers who paid full-fare economy or premium cabin tickets experience noticeably less scrutiny with the same size bags. It's not coincidental. The financial model depends on converting basic economy customers into revenue generators through add-on fees. Your ticket was cheap because the airline planned to make money off you in other ways. Bag fees are the easiest and most consistent method. You're not being stopped because your bag is actually oversized. You're being stopped because you're flying a fare class where enforcement generates badly needed income. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. When you board matters more than ever. Passengers in early boarding groups, like Group 1 through 3, face significantly less carry-on scrutiny than those boarding later. Gate agents are focused on maintaining the boarding flow when priority passengers are moving through. They're less likely to stop someone for a borderline bag when the emphasis is on efficiency and customer service for higher-paying travelers. But once boarding reaches Group 5 and beyond, enforcement really intensifies. By this point, overhead bin space is disappearing, and gate agents know they'll need to start forcing checks anyway. Later boarding groups experience dramatically higher bag rejection rates, even with luggage identical to what passed through earlier. It creates a competitive disadvantage that goes beyond just bin space. If you're boarding last, you're not just scrambling for overhead room. You're also facing stricter judgment on whether your bag qualifies in the first place. The later you board, the more likely you'll be stopped, regardless of whether your bag actually violates any rule. International flights operate under completely different carry-on standards. And, honestly, this creates serious problems for connecting passengers. Many international carriers allow larger or heavier bags than U.S. domestic rules permit. If you're flying internationally and then connecting to a domestic flight, the bag that was perfectly acceptable on your transatlantic route suddenly becomes non-compliant when you switch to the domestic carrier. Gate agents at the connecting airport don't care what you were allowed to carry on your previous flight. They enforce the domestic rules, and your bag gets checked. The reverse situation is just as frustrating. Travelers accustomed to strict domestic enforcement pack conservatively, then discover they could have brought more on their international segment. There's no unified standard, no clear communication about where the rules change, and passengers moving between route types constantly get caught in policy conflicts they had no way to anticipate. You can follow every rule correctly and still end up penalized simply because you switched between flight categories mid-journey. Gate agents aren't just looking at your bag's dimensions. They're trained to spot specific visual indicators that signal a bag won't fit properly in the overhead bin. Bulging zippers are an immediate red flag. If the zipper is straining or the fabric is stretched tight around the contents, your bag gets targeted regardless of measurements. External straps with items attached, jackets, shoes, anything clipped to the outside, make your bag an instant candidate for checking. Overstuffed exterior pockets that add bulk beyond the frame are another trigger. But here's what most travelers don't know. Wheel positioning matters. Bags where the wheels stick out significantly or where the rigid base extends beyond the soft body are flagged more often. Gate agents recognize that these structural elements prevent the bag from compressing in the bin. A soft duffel packed to the same external dimensions as a hard-shell roller gets treated differently because one has flex and the other doesn't. These hidden criteria explain why bags meeting the size limit still get stopped. Here's where a forced gate check can become a serious problem. If your carry-on contains lithium batteries, laptops, power banks, cameras, electric toothbrushes, anything with rechargeable batteries, and you're required to check that bag at the gate, you're suddenly facing a safety regulation conflict. Lithium batteries over certain watt-hour ratings are prohibited in checked luggage. They must stay in the cabin. When a gate agent forces you to check your bag, you're expected to remove all lithium battery devices before handing it over. But most travelers don't know this. They surrender the bag, assuming everything inside is fine, only to have TSA or airline staff discover the batteries during the loading process. At that point, your options are bad. The bag gets pulled from the flight entirely, items get confiscated, or in extreme cases, you're denied boarding for attempting to check prohibited materials. This all happens in the final minutes before departure, when you have no time to reorganize or find solutions. Gate agents now have broader authority than ever to deny boarding, and, well, they're definitely using it. If you challenge a bag check decision, refuse to comply, or argue about the enforcement, the situation can escalate really quickly. What starts as a simple disagreement about a carry-on can end with you being removed from the flight entirely. Airlines have empowered gate agents to make final calls on passenger compliance. And honestly, there's virtually no appeals process at the gate. Supervisors typically just back the agent's decision. Asking to speak to a manager rarely changes the outcome and often just delays boarding, which, creates even more tension. Passengers who push back, even politely, are now being documented as non-compliant or disruptive, and that documentation can follow you on future flights with that airline. The power dynamic has shifted completely. The moment a gate agent decides your bag doesn't comply, your realistic options are to accept the decision or risk missing your flight. Gate-checked bags create a specific problem for passengers with connecting flights. When you're forced to check your carry-on at the gate, that bag enters the checked luggage system with very little buffer time. If your connection is tight, anything under 90 minutes, there's a significant chance your bag won't make it onto your next flight. Ground crews prioritize bags that were checked at the ticket counter because those entered the system earlier. Gate-checked bags are often loaded last and transferred last. Many travelers report arriving at their destination only to discover their gate-checked bag didn't make the connection, even though they did. Here's the worst part. Airlines frequently deny responsibility for delayed bags that were forced gate checks. They argue you chose to bring a carry-on that didn't comply, so the delay is your fault, not theirs. You lose access to your belongings, sometimes for days, because of an enforcement decision you didn't control, and a system that treats your forced check as your problem. This isn't just a temporary phase. Internal airline communications and industry analysts suggest carry-on enforcement will continue intensifying throughout into 2026. What's happening now is really the normalization phase. Airlines are testing just how much stricter they can be without significant passenger pushback or media attention. As gate agents become more comfortable with aggressive enforcement, and as travelers accept it as the new standard, the policies will likely tighten even further. The gap between what's officially published and what's actually enforced at the gate is expected to widen. Airlines benefit from keeping the published rules unchanged while enforcing them more strictly in practice. It lets them claim they haven't altered their policies when questioned. Travelers flying in the next 2 years should expect inconsistency, subjectivity, and surprise fees to become standard parts of the boarding experience. The enforcement tactics being quietly introduced now will be completely normalized by late 2026. What feels aggressive today will just be how flying works tomorrow. The carry-on rules haven't officially changed. The dimensions are still the same on every airline website. But the enforcement of those rules has fundamentally shifted, and most travelers won't realize it until they're standing at the gate being told their bag doesn't qualify. There's just no going back to how things were. Airlines have discovered that stricter gate-level enforcement generates significant revenue without requiring policy changes or public announcements. They're not going to reverse course. The next time you pack for a flight, remember that the bag that cleared 20 gates last year might not make it past the gate this time. The rules you think you know are no longer the rules being applied. And, honestly, nobody's going to warn you until it's too late.